Here's a thought experiment. Let's compare two countries with incredibly high voter turnouts. Both consistently manage to get above 90% of their eligible voters to the polls. They both have mandatory voting and penalties for not casting a ballot. The reason for compulsory voting, they say, is because it's a national duty. One is Australia, the other is North Korea. Now, the aim isn't to be cynical. Of course, it's a convenient comparison because in Australia, your vote is, theoretically, a free choice of competing candidates and parties, whereas in North Korea, you have just the one choice. One choice is efficient though, you have to say. The coincidence that North Korea and Australia share high voter turnout and not much else is a quirky accident, but the aim is to explain the difference between voter turnout and voter engagement, which is where the argument for and against compulsory voting comes to rest. Or more specifically, a question of quality versus quantity. Australians would no doubt argue that they have both, and if that's true, perhaps we should follow the Aussies and implement a similar policy here in the UK. Australia, along with Argentina, Belgium, Mexico and Singapore, is among 20 countries across the world that have a mandatory voting policy. In Australia's case, it's been compulsory since 1924, and I'll tend to focus on them as it's culturally similar to the UK. Also, as it happens, I've lived in both countries for more than a decade in each, and I was quite keen on compulsory voting initially, but not as keen now. I certainly don't think it's a bad idea, but if you want to stick around, I'll explain my real-life, personal observation of both systems at the end of this video. But before that, let's have a look at some of the main arguments that are used for and against compulsory voting to explore the idea a bit so you can make up your own mind. The "isn't it your duty as a citizen" argument. Whether you like it or not, you're part of a big story called a nation, and there are both rights and responsibilities that come with belonging to it. That's the idea anyway. And here's the pros and cons in relation to compulsory voting. The "isn't it your duty as a citizen" argument for compulsory voting. 1. If seen like paying taxes or jury service, which are both compulsory, voting can be seen as a civic duty. Also, like wearing a seatbelt or making sure your children attend school, there are other things that the state imposes on us that are not optional and are there for the good of the community as a whole. 2. Leaving it to others to inform themselves of the issues and vote accordingly is unfair in that important national decisions are being left to a few people. 3. You can still submit a blank ballot rather than actually vote for any candidate, so you are not forced to choose for the sake of it, although in the case of Australia it is oddly a crime to do this, even though it's practically unenforceable. All that happens is it makes your vote invalid. At any rate, this means you can still express your dissatisfaction with the choice of candidates, policy or system. The "isn't it your duty as a citizen" argument against compulsory voting. 1. It could be seen as an infringement of your rights as a private citizen to be forced to vote. 2. High voter turnout is not the same as high voter engagement. Those that routinely vote simply because they have to are more likely to tick a box for simplistic reasons, such as the candidate they are most familiar with, which could simply be down to the size of a campaign budget. That doesn't make, necessarily, for a better democracy. 3. Having fewer voters but no coercion is preferable since they are more likely to have taken the time to become familiar with the policies and issues at stake. The "who put you in charge" argument. Legitimacy is a powerful but subtle part of the democratic process. In theory, a government could still be the government if only 10% of the population turned up to vote. As long as they secured a majority of that 10%, they're good to go. But that same government would struggle at every turn because they could not confidently say that they speak for the people. That matters when, for example, you're asking people to stay at home for months on end during a pandemic. Without legitimacy, the authority to make those sorts of demands can start to unravel. Why should I do what you're telling me? No one voted for you. The "who put you in charge" argument for compulsory voting. 1. It increases confidence and interest in the system if everyone is exposed to voting. 2. Knowing that everyone will cast a vote forces parties and politicians to cater to the broader electorate instead of predictable groups that are known to turn out. 3. Negative campaigning, which the large parties also have more resources to employ, is designed to put off opponents from voting, and this becomes less effective with compulsory voting. 4. Candidates winning seats in Parliament win with a mandate from a true majority, since all registered voters will have voted. The "who put you in charge" argument against compulsory voting. 1. Compulsory voting can falsely increase the legitimacy of a government or candidate, as they can point to the high levels of voting as confirmation of their mandate, which may not have been understood or even communicated. 2. Apathy is not registered and gives a false impression of voter engagement, when in fact there may be no party or candidate that represents a voter's deepest concerns or hopes. Much more likely is a high level of misrepresentation, where voters don't feel anyone speaks for them. 3. Politicians are elected with the votes of the least interested and most ill-informed of the electorate, and these may be influenced more by sensationalist campaigning, such as that found in tabloid newspapers and on social media, since these have the most reach. The "if you have to vote, you will inform yourself" argument. This idea is roughly the same as the idea that paying your monthly gym fee will get you fit. It has very little merit as far as I can see, but then some people who pay their gym fee every month do also happen to get fit, so perhaps there's some logic. If you have to vote, you will inform yourself argument. For compulsory voting. 1. Since voting is mandatory, voters are more likely to make themselves at least somewhat familiar with the issues and policies in order to understand the choices on offer. 2. Since everyone will vote, people are more likely to talk about the issues and debate the merits of each policy. The "if you have to vote, you will inform yourself" argument against compulsory voting. 1. There is no evidence that Australians are any more politically educated or engaged than people in Norway, Ireland, New Zealand, Canada or Sweden, all of which ranked higher on their overall political participation scores in the Democracy Index 2020 from the Economist Intelligence Unit. None of those countries have compulsory voting. 2. Refer to point 1 again. There's just no evidence for it. At risk of just being dismissed as the Kiwi arguing against anything Aussies are for, compulsory voting does seem to be very much like blaming voters for not being engaged enough. Sure, we should all take our democratic duties more seriously, but is this the best way to achieve that? I've experienced both sides of this policy, having lived more than 10 years in Australia and even more years here in the UK. Although this is totally anecdotal and nothing scientific, I didn't find a difference in engagement in Australia in the public dialogue about policy. If anything, I'd give the edge to the UK for having a higher tolerance for discussion. If all you'd like to see is more voter turnout, then it definitely works at the most practical level. But if you want voter engagement with the policies people are voting for alongside that turnout, then it needs to go hand in hand with better public discussion. That last point is something you're unlikely to find anyone at Vote for Policies arguing against. If there's anything that the pandemic has taught us, it's that the success of the vaccination program, touch wood, has been down to both logistics, much like polling stations and a concentrated public education program, to set the optional taking of a vaccine as a solemn public duty rather than a take it or leave it personal choice. It might be that the same approach could work with voting for similar outcomes. If not, a 90+% turnout created by threat of fine or even prosecution could look suspiciously like confirmation of a mandate to the winning party, when in fact all that people voted for was the least worst option. Changing political outcomes is still down to engaging people at the level of ideas and creating a narrative that they want to support. Welcome to democracy. What do you think? You've heard our ideas, let us know in the comments what yours are. Now it's time for some YouTube democracy. Smash that like button and subscribe if you want to see more of us. In fact, if you hit that bell, you'll even get notified when there's a new video. Democracy can be loud, but no matter how noisy the issues are, always remember that your voice matters too, and not just at election time.